in just a few minutes. I just want to do a couple of initial remarks. So my name is Pete Baker. I'm the Deputy Director of the Health Programme at CGD. Thank you very much.
We, the Center for Global Development, we're a group that try and see how we can make the international system that supports global development work more effectively.
How do we finance infrastructure in the poorest parts of the world? How do we increase productivity in agriculture? What kind of policy brings out the best outcomes?
What CGD is about is you can ask those difficult questions that people refuse to ask and actually find solutions.
We're thinking about how climate change will impact migration patterns, how that will in turn have impacts on people's health.
It's challenging to be able to align budget with ambitious programmatic goals, but it can be done.
If you can help to make things a little bit better, that's a good way to spend your time.
Okay, welcome to this Centre for Global Development event. My name is Pete Baker. I'm the Deputy Director of the Health Programme here at CGD. Welcome to everyone in the room in London. It's really a delight to have you here. Welcome to John-Arne and Røttingen, and welcome to everyone online as well. Before I introduce our guest in more detail, I just wanted to let you know that there will be time at the end, about 20 minutes for questions, so please keep your questions until then. For those online, you can ask questions through Slido, which is linked on the YouTube channel and on the website. You can also do Twitter through the hashtag CGD Talks or @CGDev. Okay, so welcome, John-Arne and Røttingen. Really delighted to have you here today. I think you're one of those amazing people that many of us look up to for global health leadership. I think part of that is because of this amazing trajectory you've done in your career that spans, one of the few people I think that spans kind of clinical research, kind of health policy and diplomacy as well. So I just wanted to let everyone know a bit more about your background. So I understand you started as a doctor and went through medical school and did clinical research, right? And then you were the CEO of the Norwegian Research Council, and then the founding CEO of CEPI, before going on to be the ambassador for global health for Norway. But if that wasn't busy enough, then you've also had some really fun advisory roles, I think. Is that right? So I've seen you've done advisory role for WHO, for Gavi, for the G20 high-level independent panel for pandemic financing, and recently for the Future of Global Health initiatives as well. And that brings you now, I guess, to your new exciting role for the Wellcome Trust. As this is the new CEO of Wellcome Trust, so I understand that there's about $1.7 billion portfolio of research and policy engagement funding there, which I think gives you a real interesting mix of roles and responsibilities that I think everyone will be delighted to hear your views on today. So welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah. If it's all right, we'd just like to start with a kind of introductory open question about your views on global health policy. So you've had all these different perspectives from Norway, from the global level, from research to policy and diplomacy. How do you see kind of the state of global health now, and what do you see are the main kind of challenges and opportunities that we should be talking about?
Yeah, an excellent question, and I guess it really depends on whether we look at the determinants, the policy, the financing, the outcomes. Because if you look at and many will say it's a difficult time, but if you look at the outcomes and the global health, population health situation, it's never better almost than now. Recently the Global Burden of Disease was published. There have been systematic improvements over the years. We still have, in particular, pockets and countries where in dire strait, and of course we have the conflicts going on and the large migrations that are impacting individual population groups. But in general, we are doing well. At the same time, we have a very difficult climate. Climate change, to start with that one, needs big investments internationally. The geopolitical situation is difficult, partly due to the conflicts and partly due to also a pandemic where, in a way, science never ever have really delivered so effectively, so efficiently to that success. And of course, part of that was chance, to be honest, because scientific discoveries are difficult and they can go wrong. This time we managed as a global community to develop vaccines in 11 months from the viral sequence was published. But in a future pandemic, we may not have that viral sequence because countries are not agreeing on when to share data and information. We may be more unlucky from the scientific point of view. And we may even be in a worse situation when it comes to understanding how we can maximize the impact of a constrained resource as vaccines were. Because the other learning from the pandemic is that we really were not in a position to distribute vaccines from a population or public health point of view, but it went to countries with the ability to purchase based on funds. So we are, yes, in a good state, but also in a difficult state. And I'm sure we will talk more about several of those issues, including the need for resource mobilization, which is often on the minds of those working on global health. Yeah. Maybe too much on our mind in some sense, instead of focusing on implementation and maximizing impact of what we do.
Fantastic, yes. Yeah, it's an interesting sort of dilemma you almost have to have in your head between the world is getting better, but also there seems to be so many things that are going wrong, and we don't seem to be doing as much as we could do to deliver on the potential. But just coming back, I guess, to the pandemic side then, with our colleagues meeting in Geneva at the moment, and a treaty or an agreement ideally to be signed next week. I know you're a bit sceptical of some of this. What do you see as why this has been so problematic? Why have we not managed to reach, as a diplomat, maybe you have got some insights on this. Why are we struggling so hard to get that kind of agreement at the global level?
So, an agreement in general is important. Yes. And the most important instrument we have is the international health regulations when it comes to regulating country governments' behaviors in a way, and indeed collaboration. We also know that it seems to, at least, that the international health regulations, there will be consensus on amendments so that hopefully it can improve a bit. There will still be large gaps, and we know in particular the link between country responsibilities, the so-called core capacities that countries need to have, and their ability to actually get them, have them, finance them, and demonstrate capabilities on the ground. That gap will probably not be closed with IHR amendments. There's no financing instrument related to the IHR, and I don't think the amendment will correct that either. So not clarity on how countries both should mobilize domestic resources, but also be supported or can collaborate around financing. But then in addition, the pandemic illustrated that there are many things that the IHR have really not been set up to solve. And I think the big issue, and which is now very difficult, is indeed related to the consequences of the inequities in vaccine access that I just talked about. Yeah. It is the balance between, in very simple terms, innovation and ensuring, if we are successful in innovation, that those are accessible. And the problem is that most of our instruments to incentivize and maximize speed of innovation, they are related to exclusivity in some way, monopolies, or in some way making sure that there are strong financial incentives to control those innovations, which is counter to the objective of access for everyone. And all those incentives are, of course, constructed by governments. We have constructed them because we need private sector investments. And how do we link the need for speedy innovation, as I said, very quickly sharing of pathogen sequences or pathogen samples? Everyone would agree that if you start to set up a system where we need transactions, where you need sort of a contract, more or less, an agreement between one country giving a sequence and a receiving country or a private actor in those settings receiving it, we will just lose half a year at least. And we cannot lose half a year. We have the world has a 100-day mission now in a way of doing things even faster. So how do we balance those incentives and mechanisms to speed innovation with equitable access? And I think that's the core, to my mind, of the disagreement. And it's not easy solutions. And the problem is also, I think if we have been able to fully ring-fence the sort of policies, regulations around emergencies and crises, I think actually that we would potentially have been able to agree on a different system in those sort of crises. But I think many actors, for important reasons, are afraid that if we then start agreeing something in this context, that will spread to other contexts. And then there's fear of the incentives for innovation not being sufficiently strong for all the other innovations we will need in health and in energy or agriculture or whatever. So I think, at least based on what we hear in social media and in channels, that it will be difficult. We know how long it took just to negotiate the pandemic influenza frameworks, PIP agreement, preparedness framework, and that was just for one single pathogen. And I don't think the experience from the pandemic has made, I think, this issue much more sort of clear for, in particular, the interest from low and middle income countries, for a good reason.
And perhaps broadening out beyond the pandemic then, thinking about your work on the future of global health initiatives and the kind of perspective that it's not just pandemic global cooperation that's been weak recently, it's perhaps the whole global health architecture and the financing architecture that there's a general sense, and the report that you collaborated on also pulled this out, the needs for reform. But is it perhaps fair to say that there's lack of clarity amongst most of those high-level actors on what the solution might be to resolve that? And I just wonder whether you've got any thoughts on where that's going. What is the game plan for the next step beyond FGHI? Where is the global health architecture going, and why can't countries seem to agree on what that kind of reform might look like?
Again, I think these are not easy solutions. I think there are true dilemmas because a lot of what we have done in global health, since we really managed to mobilize more political interest and understanding of the importance of human capital and health and I think that happened more or less around year 2000. Several different initiatives, the MDGs, the Commission on Macroeconomics and Health, the establishments of the Global Fund, just to mention some sort of specific events. I think there was an agreement that yes, we need a sort of a global public goods approach to supporting countries on particular disease areas, partly where there were lack of incentives for innovation, back to the problem we discussed, and where international and collective funding would be necessary and private sector was not sufficiently incentivized. So the larger landscape around product development partnerships or neglected tropical diseases or more broadly poverty-related diseases. And then also understanding that even when you have innovations, if you really want to scale for access in, let's say, Africa, and antiviral treatments is an example, we needed to aggregate demand. I guess the aggregation of demand was not at that stage, because then we were already far too. We should have done this as a world much earlier, of course. But let's say for many other areas, there was not clarity that there would be someone to buy these products at the scale necessary. So this aggregation of demand through pooled procurement mechanisms that really both the Global Fund and Gavi at least started to be, those have been the solutions in a way. And I think that's and the automatic system in global health after that that's a success. It has delivered outcomes. It has mobilized resources. Okay, next problem. We identify a problem. We see that we need to do something on it. We need our own new mechanism for this. We need to mobilize resources through the same logic. We need to aggregate demand, have an organization in Geneva or in London or in Oslo, where we established CEPI, and sort of do that on a global scale. And I think the success then started to become a problem. And some would say it was already a problem when it started. Some would say that it has become more of a problem because of the proliferation of these, let's say, vertical, that's the old model, initiatives. And for countries, it's really not helpful. It's helpful if you run the health system or the world from a global point, but that's not the reality. Health systems are run in countries or even in states within countries or in regions within countries. They would need to make decisions on how should we spend the available resources to maximize population health in our context. That's any model of primary healthcare or universal healthcare based systems. And then if that is the starting point, and where is then the role of these global mechanisms? And can we find a model for coexistence? And I think some of you know of this Future of the Global Health Initiatives agenda. That was really a main issue, and it became even the more crucial issue when listening to country voices in that process. Countries, governments, and also civil society representatives from those countries wanted to be in a position to maximize health impact by defining, both implementing things more holistically, so that's the way of implementing healthcare or even prevention, but also to make sure that prioritization could be done from a population point of view, what is most impactful in my country. And then that collides with us, and I was then at the donor side wanting discrete results on individual diseases and had established financing instruments for each of those. I'm not saying it's an either-or model, but I'm saying that if we want sustainable health systems and domestic financing, political accountability in countries, we need to gradually support that accountability, those systems, and we need to deliver the global health sort of support into such a logic. We can still have the aim to control infectious diseases in particular, and I think there is a special case argument around control of infectious disease that is different from this sort of maximizing health impact, because if I control the infectious disease in this part of the room, it will benefit that part even if we don't do anything there. That's because my infection is the risk for others and so forth. So this population effect that is both within countries and across countries is a special argument for why we want to overall reduce the risk of infections by collective efforts.
Do you think there's any way of tackling that kind of global problem, but doing it in a manner that still sticks to those principles that you're talking about around kind of from the country perspective, from priority setting, country empowerment? Is there a way of managing those two things, or is there only way to go to kind of DC-based pandemic fund type solutions to these problems?
No, I think there is definitely a way to a middle ground. I think we can see this more from a global public goods point of view. What can we deliver collectively most efficiently? So research and innovation, yes. New technologies, aggregation of demand, I think is still a potential supranational benefit that will benefit country decision makers. That doesn't need necessarily to be in one point, sort of in one global procurement, but it could be more regional. by being more regional or multi-country, depending on regions, it comes closer to country decision makers. And the closer you come, you start also to empowering and get the engagement that you need to drive towards sustainability. So could we do that and in a way set up those structures, finance those, of course, and support the designs and the R&D, but then also do sort of resource transfer to country governments, so that they, in a way, so that they will control to the larger extent, with oversight from civil society, because I think we should not shy away from the fact that some of these areas are contested politically. They are related to human rights questions. Sexually transmitted infections is just one space where that is evident, of course. But still, that more general financing really to countries, but where they can utilize the mechanisms and the systems that we collectively support. Yeah.
Great. So if we could turn now just to your new role in the Wellcome Trust. I realise you've not been there that long, but just want to get a sense of what your ambitions are, your objectives are, what you're hoping to get out of your time at Wellcome Trust.
Yeah, so first it was really an honor to be recruited to Wellcome Trust, I must say. When you portrayed my career in that very nice way in the introduction, I was thinking, how should I respond to this? And I think I've been fortunate, and with my trait and genetics, I think that works for me. I've been fortunate to do many different things instead of go deep. So I am a jack of all trades, a master of none. And in that sense, I believe I'm now so fortunate to be able to build on several, almost all the different points in my career, as a research funder, as a diplomat, as a public health official agency, setting up a PDP like CEPI, being a physician scientist, starting on the micro level with calcium imaging in cells. By the way, I was sitting next to Lord Tucker, the head of the coordination body of health research in the UK, and we have done our PhD almost at the same time, almost at the same, on the same molecule. So, and we are far away from that molecule, both of us today. But I think my point is that I have an understanding of biology and life science in that sense, but moved my own research career much more to epidemiology, global health, health policy. So I'm very fortunate to have been exposed to different ways of everything, really from science to policy. And I think that's probably more of the consistency of my background, is that I'm so committed to research and science, informing society, improving society, having impact, but also because it's interesting. I started studying medicine not because I wanted to become a doctor, but actually because I found the science and the biology interesting. But then became more motivated by the big questions. So I remember already in medical school, we started a working group among students and a couple of professors we called the Patient Earth, where the Earth was the patient. Today that would be called planetary health, I guess. And so I did that alongside my calcium imaging work and the clinical work. But back to Wellcome, so then what do I want to do with this organization? I think this is a fantastic organization. It is a research investor, a global research investor based in London, so definitely rooted in the UK context, but with ambitions to have global impact. On the insights we fund research to provide, but also on the three priority areas where we really want to drive towards solutions: on mental health, on climate and health, and on infectious diseases. So when you ask me what is my priority, I was really recruited to deliver on that strategy, a 10-year plan. We will not get all the solution in 10 years because things take time. They don't take 11 months necessarily to make a new vaccine. And so I'm really committed to just make Wellcome work better as an organization. I'm very much a team player, and I like to work with people. I don't think a big leader at the top should really have an ambition what I want to do, because I don't think that will be very impactful in the end.
Okay. I guess many people here will be aware that those 3 priorities were set out before you joined, of course. So are you saying then, for now, there's not a re-emphasis or a change or addition or anything else that you would like to add as your vision for that?
No, I think those are really important priorities, and for different reasons. Infectious diseases, a long-standing priority area for Wellcome, so it builds on the science and expertise of the organization, but not at least also on the groups we have been funding here in the UK, but even more importantly in Africa and Southeast Asia. They have focused systematically on the needs of their community, and those have been driven by infectious diseases for ages. And it's also then related to what we just discussed earlier on the problem of incentives for solutions that there is really no market for from a commercial point of view. Market failures, foundations can play a role where private sector incentives are not sufficient, and we can take a role that government normally is not used to take, because the role is normally to fund basic or upstream research and maybe more service-oriented applied research, and then leave technology development to private sector. I think in the infectious disease space we need a partnership model, and foundations can play a role. And as you have seen, many of you, we just formed a tripartite partnership with Gates Foundation and the Novo Nordisk Foundation, where infectious disease is one of the priorities. And then mental health, very different, a problem across all countries, and as a part of health and well-being that has been under-prioritized, that is less sexy. I remember my first year in medical school, and there was a sociologist who had done research on professional culture in Norway and the prestige of different specialities. Neurosurgery, heart surgery on top. What was the bottom? Psychiatry. Yeah. So but
public health.
And yeah, no, I'd not even mentioned probably, to be honest. But I think the ambition of Wellcome then has been to really try to crowd in interest from the research community, make it a new multidisciplinary field, make it not for psychiatrists or psychologists or neuroscientists, but say that we want to build a new mental health space or a field of research. We want to focus on new solutions. They can be biomedical, they can be behavioral, they can be digital, and how can the community come together, and in a way it's about building a research field that has been under prioritized and needs more investments and more interest, including from government. So I hope we can crowd in more governments. And then what will happen downstream? Of course, we will create a new mental health fund. No, we will not. My point is that model will not work. So that mental health will need to be an integrated part of primary health care or population health in all countries, and we just need to make it visible on the agenda. And then climate and health. Climate is the biggest challenge for the world, and to be honest, I have struggled a bit to understand what can we do from the health sector side, and from and also when I was an ambassador of global health, what's our role? Yes, we are 4% of the 45%, I think, globally of the carbon emissions, bigger in countries that are spending a lot on health, like the US, 18% of GDP. Of course, then the contribution of emissions from the health sector will be much higher. So we have a role to do to green the health sector. That is not a responsibility for Wellcome, because that's mainly infrastructure, energy, and not our expertise. So we focus on how climate is impacting health directly through heat, through extreme weather events, and the more I sort of understand and see this space, this is not about the future. This is not about just sort of trying to model and have scenarios for what will happen in the future, and in a way try to scare politicians now that you need to do something. It's actually happening now. And when I was in Blantyre visiting our the center we fund there, a partnership between Malawi and Liverpool, they just showed me how the river after the big storm had come down from the top of the mountain. It's just and how things are really changing, how cholera outbreaks are now very normal, and so climate change is impacting health in particularly developing countries as we speak. So we need to pay attention to that.
Yeah, I think everyone would agree that those are really three major priorities in global health. I guess just picking up the first one, infectious diseases, you talked a lot about, I guess, the need to invest and develop mechanisms to, I guess, pull investment, pull research on those particular areas to develop new technologies. I guess I'm also struck by earlier conversation that many people don't have access to the technologies that exist at the moment, and that many countries perhaps don't have the systems to be able to, don't have the finance to be able to purchase all the new technologies that might come out, but let alone work out which ones are the best and do the complicated priority setting that might be needed for that. I just wonder whether you see a role for Wellcome Trust in that more implementation space, in the country policy space, that kind of area.
So just to be very honest, that has not been a traditionally Wellcome priority. Wellcome has funded more upstream foundational research and of course also clinical trials, epidemiology, focusing on specific areas. Now when we have identified these, what we call now solution areas, and in a way it's saying that we have discovery science and solution-oriented science and they need to work together. We want to drive towards health impact. So in some way we would need at least to see that the knowledge systems that are on the ground have sufficient evidence and knowledge and understanding to implement solutions that are coming and can take them up, and that speaks to the broader need for implementation research, health services research, health systems research, many names. Wellcome has not been not funding that space, but because many of you will know that Wellcome has been an important investor in humanities relevant to health and well-being and on social sciences. What I want to do is just maybe to connect the dots a bit more so that we see that the contribution in particular of non-health or non-natural science disciplines to health also, at least I'm a doctor, I'm an engineer, I want to see impact, so I will tend to have an instrumental approach to most research and therefore also the social sciences and humanities. Not that sort of critical theory and empowering voices and having other perspectives as a part of the research community is important, but I think we can contextualize a lot of that also in the view of improving health impact, population health, implementation, health systems, because those insights are an important part of the total sort of knowledge system, as I mentioned.
And I guess there's a logic to say that you can centrally, based in London, work out what the key research priorities are and fund them from there. But going back to our early conversation, do you see a role for kind of decolonizing or distributing or regionalizing or finding a way to bring more voices to Wellcome Trust to determine the direction?
Yeah, and so irrespective of whether it's sort of a biomedical research area or an issue on TB sort of care in Africa, I don't think we can cook up that set of list of priorities or strategies in 215 Euston Road. A research funder and is a facilitator. It's a funder. It's sort of empowering others to implement, and that's the research community. And of course, there is the communities that researchers in some ends, at least in the end stage, should serve. So we need to integrate that in our decision making, in our processes. We do that through the way we set the strategies. We have systematic ways of listening to communities and to people with lived experience or patients groups in some context. It's hard to do that at global scale. You cannot really do that. So that's why we want at least the larger programs we fund. We fund core funds RE in South Africa, in KwaZulu-Natal, a big center in Kilifi in Kenya, the Blantyre I mentioned in Malawi, and then noded centers with networks in both with headquarters in Thailand and in Vietnam. But then in addition, we use re-granting or fund the funders model in 2 instances, and we will probably open that third. So we support the Science for Africa Foundation based in Kenya to fund multi-country research where everything is, the priorities, the assessment of projects, the allocation and the follow-up of projects is happening there, and that builds systems, it builds capabilities, and it connects countries and groups across different institutions. We do it similarly in India with the Wellcome DBT, Department of Biotechnology India Alliance, and there actually the Indian government is funding 2/3 of the initiatives, and we 1/3. To me that's fantastic, and it's sustainability. Wellcome started it with the government, and government has gradually taken on a larger part of the financing. And then we are exploring how we can do similar with a broader set of countries in Southeast Asia, because Wellcome has first and foremost had most activity in Africa and Southeast Asia. Having said that, our open schemes are open to researchers from all low and middle income countries for the time being. Yeah.
Perhaps going broader still, then you mentioned a lot about how Wellcome Trust being thought of and is a research funder, right? It's a research organisation, but you've also funded the Future of Global Health initiatives and a range of kind of, I would see them as policy-related work around the pandemic as well. Do you see still space for that, or how is that evolving? How is that arm of policy engagement, and how's that going?
Yeah, so we say we are more than a funder, a research funder. So what I try to say now is that we are investing in research as one area, and of course that's a substantial area, and we are investing because it's not about funding, it's really about investing for outcomes, insights, health impact in the long run. Then we have an active engagement around engaging communities. I already mentioned that. That is partly to identify priorities and to get communities on board with research strategies, big clinical trials, population health strategies, for instance. But it's also to build the broader sense of trust in science. Without understanding of the value of science in community, and that's here in London, it's in Durban in South Africa, it's relevant everywhere. We won't be able to use the science as an instrument, so that's broader engagement is important. And then policy influence, where we, as a part of the toolbox to support that transition from health science research results through evidence, research synthesis, and then policy and practice, we want to influence policymakers through policy engagement, and that needs analysis, of course, and also its own research in its own right.
There's both the research side of that and also direct policy engagement, like engaging with the WHO, engaging with other.
Yes, yes, and maybe more also trying to be a facilitator, a convener, and bringing different voices to the table. The private sector, governments, civil society, academia. We are in very unique position, really, being a fully independent foundation, at least now, after Wellcome sold the original pharmaceutical company in the early 90s. It's been no links to any private sector, no links to government. The supreme governance structure is the board. There's no fundraising, so no links to any donors. So in that sense, we are extremely privileged and are totally independent. That creates a lot of questions. So what's the accountability then? And our thinking around that is our accountability is to global society. And the way to demonstrate that is through full transparency and to the processes and the way we work, how we work towards equity, health equity, how we ensure diversity and inclusion in our internal processes, and also in the way we support research and what expectations we have on the research groups we fund.
Okay, so we are coming near to the end of this part, and I want to leave time for audience questions. So perhaps one final comment. It's hard to avoid in the UK right now. That you may have seen yesterday, Prime Minister Sunak in the rain announcing a general election. So I just wonder if you've got any thoughts on what you would like to see for a renewed and new UK government coming in July. Where would you like to see the UK going in global health?
Yeah, so as a charity, of course, we have no political views, but we have clear views aligned with our strategy. And the UK is a very strong health research and life science sort of country when it comes to the capabilities in universities. That's driven by history, it's driven by clear priorities, it's driven by having a very open research system. Our sort of at least advice or wishes to any government coming in after the election is to maintain that global research system at UK universities or any research institutions in the UK. That speaks to and avoiding barriers to entry, to just put it bluntly. Either financially or in the visa systems, because talent is everywhere, and the only way to be competitive as a research-based nation is by being attractive to global talent. It also speaks to thinking long-term on science funding. So science cannot be funded year on year. It needs a long-term strategy. So a sustainable way of funding science here in the UK is important for any government, and science in an economy like this, science will be a growth machine as well. And as I said, life science is an opportunity. So the health sector is not only then a cost side. It's of course it generates a lot of health benefits. It generates jobs for the country. Of course, it's a big sector. It generates lower sick leaves proportions if run in the best way, but it can also generate commercial opportunities through life science. But that requires sustained and maybe higher investments, and the latter is hard, I understand, in the fiscal environment in the UK currently. But UK should not shy away from being the lead in G7 when it comes to research intensity. And we talked then a lot about also global health, and I'm not sure everyone knows, but UK is a champion when it comes to integrating research as a part of development aid and official development aid. It's the country that invests the highest proportion of its ODA in research, and in that sense, it's a leader, and we believe it should continue to do that, continue to be a leader. But ideally on a broader base, and the broader base is back to the 0.7, which would be, I think, a political advice in the sense that that is an agreed ambition internationally, and a 0.7 ambition combined with still a strong emphasis on research as a part of an integrated development agenda, I think will make health, global health, and life science strong sort of pillars in the UK, playing a role for the world. And we are here because we have been born here as a foundation, but we are also here because of the opportunities that the UK environment provides. But it needs to play ball and be oriented towards the global challenges and the global needs.
0.7% and open science and reforming migration. Let's see whether we have an ambitious government in July to take that one. Okay, so now turn to the audience. We'll start in the room and then we'll go online. We'll take a round of 3 questions if that's okay. Would you like to start? Sure. And then here. And then I think there was one over here as well. Did you want to? No, okay.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, John-Arne, for that. Is this on?
Yeah.
So, sort of a brief question, but quite focused on one particular issue that you brought up. You identified what one might call the jurisdictional issue between vertical programming at a global level and health system strengthening with domestic financing and local priorities. Now, in reality, I mean, the problem is that these priorities often conflict when it comes to implementation in local contexts, and a sort of strong focus on vertical programming can distort the local agendas. Now, that in itself is a problem that's been recognized for almost 60, 70 years. It's not new. So it sort of reflects a learning failure of rather epic proportions. It's not the only one in terms of how we reconcile global and local priorities. So my specific question is around like how research funding and the learning agenda can be advanced in this direction to address such sort of large learning failures of how the global and local priorities reconcile.
Thanks. Can I go back to what you said, John-Arne, about the incentives for innovation being linked to exclusivity and how that's not really in alignment with access and equity goals? Do you think there is a greater role for the public sector in innovation? And I don't just mean things like CEPI for vaccines, but really diagnostics, therapeutics, the whole set, or other ways to incentivize other than what we have now? Does something need to change? Because that seems to be a sticking point over and over and over. And I just wondered, it's a tough question of what might we think about?
One more, Sander.
Hello, I'm Zander Wellcome, and was very pleased to hear you talking about the pandemic agreement, and your piece of the FT on that was good. I had a specific question following up from what you said last, that a couple of weeks ago I saw Julia Gillard at an event talking about global health and its role in soft power for the UK. And I kind of feel like there's a bit of a tension that everyone wants to celebrate the UK's sort of leadership in life sciences. But on the one hand, you've got this is good for British jobs, this is good for the economy, and the domestic piece. And then in terms of how this boosts our partnerships in the global south, it's about technology transfer and decolonization and these sorts of issues. So I was just wondering, whether there's a new government or not, there likely will be, but making them see the value of this. Do you think that there's more as a community we need to be doing to make the case and to elevate both of those parts? Because sometimes I feel like we get confused and end up not really championing this aspect as much as we could.
So maybe first back to the learning agenda, in a way the disconnect between the two agendas. So of course it's a normative research question, but it's also an empirical research question. So from the normative, I think we need to acknowledge that the logics and the accountability around resource mobilization, they will be different than the logic of health impact and effectiveness in implementation, because they happen in two different, in a very simple model, sort of a donor-recipients model. They happen in two very different contexts. So when defending, I needed, of course, in my prior role, defend the logic of why we needed more mobilization of resources for global health. And the more specific you can be, the more results oriented, the more you can actually document all of this, the easier it is to sell in the public domain. So in that sense, that is different from, as I said, the logic of impact. And I think just to have conversations on that and actually then have conversation across those jurisdictions and across those populations about what is best for us is not necessarily best for you, and can be reconciled. So that's the normative. The empirical, I think there are good data that are actually demonstrating effectiveness challenges when it comes to impact, and that a more holistic, integrated way of delivery would be much more cost effective and actually give more health impact. So I believe we just need more research that can actually document those issues more robustly. I already have a hypothesis, as you understand, because some research is pointing in that direction, but I think we need more of that kind of research. Then on the incentives and innovation systems, I don't think public sector can take over as the main innovator in any way. Back to, I took over when I was asked to head infection control vaccination at the Norwegian Public Health Institute, we were producing at low volume vaccines still, and as you know, vaccines in particular have been produced in the public sector and still are in many contexts. We were really not set up for that, and the incentives, the focus, and to be honest, the willingness of public sector to take the risk. Biomedical innovation is very risky, and government is definitely risk averse in general. It's a minister can need to go if a project is failing, if you see what I mean, and normally 19 out of 20 projects will fail. So what is then the solution? I think we really need to look into the cost of innovation. How can we reduce the huge cost of biomedical innovation? I think clinical trial costs are far too high. I think the regulations around clinical trials have not gone on this level, but actually they are diminishing returns because they become far too complicated. Of course, that's improvement in regulations has been motivated by the protection of individuals and needed that improvement for a long time. But now I think we have overcorrected and it's really expensive. Then we have a system that is not effective of delivering clinical trials, and actually trials are a main cost of development so how and their public sector I think can play a role as a regulator but also as an implementer and actually provide. I think we can do much more of testing of new technologies as an integrated part of healthcare systems instead of setting up CRO run different models for testing. So that's at least one model. I have one. No, I won't take that. Sorry. Then on your question related to the pandemic agreement and the values, is there a sort of a disconnect between speaking about the country benefits from a growth or an economic point of view versus the global health sort of value-driven communication? I don't think it is. I think there is, because of course we all want countries to have economies that are running and growing, and we need to deliver in different sectors. And health is a sector where you can really demonstrate real value and benefit of your economic system, not only where you produce or innovate or produce, but also where it can be sold. But it's then about responsibilities and how companies hopefully can see that scale is maybe a better model than high price for a premium market. The world is changing. It's changing much faster than we understand. The economies, but indeed the populations of Asia, Latin America, and Africa are so big compared to the small markets where pharmaceutical companies today actually get most of their revenue. So we need a change in that thinking. The scaling those sales, yes, prices would need to come down, but the scale will compensate for that, and the health benefits will be huge.
We have another round here. Let's go first.
Hi, so Mariam Shamanish from RE. So you've sort of touched on it, and you've got three big areas, but in terms of the open science, Wellcome's moved away from funding clinical trials and also implementation trials. And on two levels, one in terms of the sort of innovation that you're talking about in terms of trial delivery, particularly in the global south, but also this whole question of transparency and accountability to where the studies are coming from. How does those two things align with moving away from those two big areas in the open funding?
Hi, Katrina Haug from Imperial. You talked about the aggregation of demand in order to address insufficient uptake of innovation, probably particularly the area of infectious diseases and pandemic preparedness. I would be interested to hear your views on what kind of organizational structures or other practical measures we could undertake in order to foster that. Thanks.
Just at the back, sorry, Martin. Anthony. It's the same question as just asked. Oh, okay. I think Martin was first.
Yeah, so Wellcome, along with Gallup, do some great work on trends in trust in science internationally. But I'm just wondering what Wellcome's role might be in the next step, which is to challenge those individuals and organizations that are actively undermining trust in science, because then you do get into the politics, particularly with the rise of populist politicians.
Thank you. So, yes, I know that some are saying we are moving away, moving away from supporting clinical trials and implementation research. I think we, sorry, I got this virus. Oh. I think we are not we are still open to applications, really. Sorry about that. We are still open to applications of clinical trials in our open schemes, but I think in the solution-oriented areas we will be more focused and have opportunities for that, really, moving forward. Sorry about almost no voice left. On the aggregation of demand, because I think what we have done so far is we see aggregation of demand as equal to pooling procurement at the same sort of aggregation point as the pool. And I think with the use of more data sharing and opportunities for exchange of information, I think we can structure and disconnect in a way the pool procurement points and the demand aggregation. So we can have much more transparency and sharing of demand signals, so that it's sufficiently clear to the market and to the producers, but having more distributed pool procurement mechanisms. So what would that look like from an architecture point of view? It means that we'll probably be able to establish or build on already established regional or multi-country procurement mechanisms, but that they can be connected through information sharing, and thereby being more of a global secure demand information system, to put it that way. And then it was on trust. It's a great question. We will, because we just decided that we will probably do another round of this global monitor to really follow that from a trend point of view. But my first question was alongside yours. Yes, but what do we do? What is our intervention? How do we react on the data? And we are starting to explore what can we do. Can we do something from a just communication information sharing point of view, or do we need more tougher sort of policy statements and positions? It's too early to say, and it can be difficult, because being a legitimate and neutral organization is easy if you are apolitical, but the more we want impact, I think the more we would need to take political stance on some issues. So how do we balance that? I think will be key in the years to come.
Okay, I'm afraid we're out of time for questions in the room, but there's a couple online that I can quickly read out, if you don't mind, John-Arne. Firstly, how do you anticipate Wellcome will factor in gender inequalities and their effect on health on the work that you invest in? And then, secondly, thinking about mental health, how will you ensure co-creation with LMICs on mental health innovations that you're investing in?
Yeah, so gender equality will. So I've worked a lot on that from a research system point of view. So how can we address that in building a gender diverse research community? When it comes to the research priorities and the strategy, I think it's about inclusion, what I've just said earlier, it's about inclusion, diversity in perspectives when we decide on strategies and priorities. And to be honest, maybe gender is a dimension. I'm a bit afraid that gender is a dimension but then we now and then tend to forget because other dimensions have become more visible. To me, that is definitely an important part of intersectionality and something that the job is not done in any countries. Then on mental health, yes, as I said, we are engaging people with lived experiences on setting our mental health priorities and agenda, and we are doing that locally through some of the research centers we support as well, and that is something we would continue to do. Yeah.
Wonderful. I think we're sadly at the end of time, but thank you so much for joining us, John-Arne. It's been a really inspiring discussion. We've covered such wide-ranging topics from innovation systems and how they can be optimized to the challenges of global coordination and corporations between countries and managing the national to the global tensions, the need to develop new technologies at for major priorities, and it's been wonderful to hear your vision for the Wellcome Trust and the three kind of main priorities for the Wellcome Trust going forward and how that will feed into the work you're doing. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you everyone in the room and online as well. And yeah, please join us again next time.
Thank you.